earlier. They were like this.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, this is not going to work. Try that one more time.
As long as it's sending audio to where it's supposed to go.
Look, 2 shirts.
Settled.
All that up there.
You ready? Okay. Good evening. It's nice to see all these smiling faces. Welcome to the Hartford School Board meeting of July the 30th, 2025. Call to order. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? None? Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Okay, and do I hear a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we'll move on to governance policy, the PCB update, the latest test results and implications. And we're going to turn it over to Jonathan first, I believe.
All right, thanks. Is that gonna work okay? Let's see, quickly, I'll move right along because we have some actual experts here tonight. I want to give them time, but in preparation for this, the superintendent asked me to just kind of give a brief overview of the various issues that are going on at the high school right now, to contextualize this issue and to address what has been some conflation of issues, some misunderstanding of linkage between issues. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. If anybody has any specific questions about specific issues, happy to address them later. But outstanding issues at the high school, some of which are being addressed by the bond, some of them are operational. Easiest way to do it is probably start geographically at the north end. We have a stormwater system that is in need of an engineering redesign and replacement. We have the north concrete staircase and retaining wall that you passed on your way in that needs to be replaced. We have a water infiltration problem that we need to address when we do all that. We have some structural issues in the catacomb storage area under our feet, mechanical space under our feet. We still have the outstanding issue related to replacing the fire alarm system in the entire facility that we have an abeyance while we figure out the PCB thing. The same is true of the sprinkler system. That is complicated a bit by the fact that we have to add another water service to provide enough water for a sprinkler system. We have various life safety violations outstanding, nothing that is keeping us from operating but need to be addressed. Some overdue architectural stuff, lots of electrical and lighting stuff in the theater. Again, nothing that's not keeping us from doing what we do, but we do need to address it. The local folks, actually on all levels, have been great about looking at the big picture and not making us address these little things until we understand the big picture. We still are chasing this water quality issue with some lead results that keep coming back, and again, ironically, dealing with the same agency, very understanding that work can be wrapped up into this larger abatement issue eventually. And then most recently, learned that we have some outstanding issues related to our number 2 and Greenwood chip boilers, where we have some overdue regulatory compliance issues to address. So there's a lot going on, and each one of those is, I just want to make it clear that each one of those is an individual issue, and while they may be addressed in a unified way, one doesn't really drive the other. The other thing I want to point out is, none of these issues are new. Some of them are decades old. So it's not like the sky is falling. We just got a pretty cloudy day. So with that as background, and to talk about PCBs as a singular issue, again, for those listening or who have been involved, a very quick recap. Act 74 PCB testing, we did the initial survey of materials, the initial air sampling, moved on to bulk material sampling in areas where the air samples indicated that needed to happen. I'm going to let Cassie explain that because she knows what she's talking about. From that, we moved on at the request of the board to some substrate sampling to understand the extent of the contamination. And then as far as next steps go, at the direction of the board to move towards the solution of removing contaminated materials, removing the source contaminated materials from the building, while maintaining our compliance with the regulatory requirements. We will keep up with our quarterly air sampling. And Cassie and I have had a couple good conversations about how to move that along, and that's moving along. And then the sampling in the rest of the building, we have a good roadmap, a good kind of idea of how to put that together in terms of getting pricing and doing the testing in a way that gets the board the information they need to understand the totality of contamination, but keeps us in keeping with the regulatory requirements around how that testing is done and managed. And then kind of in another swim lane, developing the ECA, which again, I'll let Cassie explain the details, the evaluation of corrective action alternatives, which lays out the suite of options that we have. And I think, the understanding from the board is that we're going to get rid of contaminated materials, but what the ECA does is shows us, that there may be some options other than that for consideration, for your consideration, and there may be some interim steps that can be taken. It just kind of looks at the big picture. So these consultants who are giving us numbers to do quarterly air sampling and the bulk material sampling in the remainder of the building, which is not required, but the board was asked to have that done. We will also have them prepare an ECA for review by Cassie's team as part of that process. So that is the pretty quick overview. And if we want to circle back to any specific questions about any of those issues later, we can. But thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Cassie because I've listened to her a lot and she knows what she's talking about. So thanks.
Thank you.
Mike, can I have sharing permissions?
So I do have a presentation that'll be popping up in a second, but I guess I'll start with introducing myself. So my name is Cassandra Kimmey, and I work for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And I was talking with Katie earlier, and I think I've been working with your district it'll be going on 3 years in this fall. It's been the end of 2022, I think, is when we started. And it's also our 3rd time here addressing the board, so we appreciate the invite and for giving us some time out of your meeting to talk with you all. Okay. Actually, let's pop out for 1 second. So today what I'm going to be talking about is providing primarily some background information on PCBs, what they are. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Andrea Kirk, who's going to talk more about the health impacts in more detail. Then we'll move on to summarizing some of the quarterly work that's been going on, in addition to all the building materials sampling. And then finally, at the end, transition to cleanup planning, some things to think about, how we'll move that process forward, and some things for hopefully the board to keep in mind as you consider different cleanup options. All right, I'll go on to the next slide. So what are PCBs? So PCB is an acronym. It stands for polychlorinated biphenyl. And it's a group of man-made chemicals that are found in all types of different building materials, things from glues and mastics, all the way to fluorescent light ballasts, fireproofing, kind of a whole consortium of products that show up in a lot of places. The PCBs also don't break down over time. They don't break down quickly in the environment. So even though they were banned by the EPA in 1979, they continue to be very persistent, especially in the environment and in our schools, such that even if these materials were put in place way back in 1965 when the school was built, we do see that they're still present and they still impact indoor air by releasing those PCBs over time. So Vermont law requires all public and approved independent schools built or renovated before 1980 to be tested for PCBs in indoor air, which is how we entered into this program. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to talk a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Andrea Kirk. I'm the new Vermont State Toxicologist. I've been here about 6 months and just moved to Vermont 3 days ago.
Oh, my.
So it's still,
Well, welcome.
Getting oriented. But I've been working in endocrine disruption for about 25 years and actually wrote my first term paper in middle school on PCBs back in 1978. So it's been a while. So what we have with PCBs, I'm sure you've heard this, probably most of you already, it concerns with cancer. And there's animal testing studies that show particularly risk of liver cancer, but also breast cancer and associations between PCB exposures and melanoma. PCBs are really interesting to a toxicologist because they do so many different things, and this is what we geek out about. It's not good, but it's an interesting toxicological problem. So for the non-cancer effects, you're going to see immunosuppression, and this could be important in terms of how many colds and runny noses a kid might get, their response to vaccines, and even increasing risk of cancer. So we could kind of jump over to the cancer side as well. Reproductive effects, effects on the nervous system, and this can happen particularly during prenatal development and is associated with visual kind of integration, acuity, perception, possibly reduced IQ, learning disabilities, reading disabilities, stuff that you don't want to happen to the kids in your school. And then endocrine disruption for thyroid and androgens, estrogens, chiefly. Hope that wasn't too fast. Too much? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, do you guys have questions? Oh, second, sorry. Okay, so what we're doing for kids and teachers and staff here is try to reduce PCB intake or exposures to the greatest degree as we reasonably can. So Vermont has developed school action levels, and there are different levels for different ages. Some people are particularly more vulnerable when they're little, and they also tend to do a lot more hand-to-mouth activity, don't like washing their hands, and et cetera. So they're more likely to intake greater amounts of PCBs. So we want to set the air level for pre-K and younger at 30 nanograms per cubic meter. For kids who are a little bit older, kindergarten through 6th grade, 60 nanograms per cubic meter, and then for adults, 7th grade through adults at 100 nanograms. So these are levels we want to not exceed, generally speaking. If we do see a level that's 3 times that high, so 90 nanograms per cubic meter for pre-K and younger, 180 for kindergarten through 6th grade, and 300 for 7th grade through adult, this is the point at which we need to take action to reduce people's exposures. And I'm hearing impaired too, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We're good?
Yeah, but it will, this house may have for indoor.
For indoor, yes, indoor air, of course. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go over kind of an overview of the way our program works, at least the initial steps and the initial framework. Jonathan touched on this already, so I appreciate that. So the first step is for the environmental consultant to come in, and they'll go through all of the pre-1980s spaces in each school, each and every single room, and they'll make a list of every suspect material they find. So it results in a really, really long list of a whole bunch of materials that could contain PCBs, and that we're flagging for potentially future investigation after we do indoor air sampling. They take all of that information and they start breaking out the rooms and spaces into different groups, and they're grouped together based on similar PCB, potentially PCB-containing materials. So if there's similar flooring in a large area or maybe a similar paint color, those rooms could be grouped together. If there are similar heating and cooling systems, or if there's a similar construction or renovation area from the school. So I know at Hartford specifically, some areas were built in the 60s, the tech center was added on later, and then there were some other additions later in the 80s and 90s. So all those things kind of get amalgamated together, and what we end up with is the whole school, whole floor plan, with rooms divided into each individual group. Then they come back and do indoor air sampling. So they sample 30% of rooms in each group. So if there's a group of 10 classrooms, they'd come back and they'd sample at least 3 of those classrooms in that group. Grouping rooms together like that and then sampling 30% allows us to extrapolate that indoor air data from the 30% to the rest of the spaces in that group. Once that data comes back from the lab, I review it, and my colleagues at Health also review it, and they prepare a set of occupancy recommendations based on that data. And we usually have a couple options to present to the school based on what the indoor air values were, and really trying to balance keeping kids in school, but also providing a healthy learning environment at the same time. On to the next one. So this is a slide I actually pulled from the first presentation that we did here. So these are our April 2024 indoor air results. And we saw a pretty wide range. Some areas were very low, not detectable by the lab, and then some other areas were well over those SALs and IALs that Andrea mentioned, up to 1,000 nanograms per meter cubed. Some areas where we saw the highest concentrations were in the northeast corner, so kind of the area around the kitchen and the culinary arts kitchen, and that addition up in the northeast corner, a couple classrooms in that area, and also some spaces around the gym. In addition to that, the first and second floors of the B wing, and then a couple other spaces in that gym area, we noted school action level exceedances, so that lower value of 100. We noticed some kind of in that range, but the northeast corner was where we saw our predominantly highest results. Okay, thanks. Oh no, I see my arrows got messed up. That's okay. So this is just a schematic, really high-level overview of kind of our whole process and how we're going to move through from sampling to remediation. So from that initial set of indoor air results, we saw that yes, we did have a school action level exceedance, which means we move into materials testing. So actually going in and taking samples of all those suspect materials that the consultant found in their very first step and determining if they are PCB containing or not. And this is often an iterative process, so it's quite often that we'll have a holistic understanding of all of the source areas, all of the source materials, and that we know if they are potentially impacting adjacent materials or anything else to really further our understanding of the site and make sure that when we do get to cleanup, we have a really strong base and foundational knowledge. All right, on to the next one. Okay. So following these indoor air results, these tell us that there are PCB impacted materials in those locations and that they are releasing PCBs into indoor air and affecting the indoor air quality above our health-based values. So until these materials are addressed, they will continue to impact indoor air, which is why we transitioned into this building materials investigation to really drill down into exactly what is causing the problem here so that we can eventually address it. So Fuss & O'Neill was the environmental consultant who we did 2 big site investigations between fall and early spring of 2025. I didn't put their full list of sample materials up here. I think we collected, it was definitely over 1,000 samples. So really big data set. Some of the really big groups they looked at where we found high PCB concentrations were caulks. So this is caulk around door frames, caulk around windows, caulk and expansion joints. Also various types of sealants, glazes and varnishes, and wall and floor paint and select spaces. So I put this picture up on the right just as a visual. So this is an example of an exterior caulk sample that was collected. So the picture is taken from outside, looking at an original window that was installed probably in the 1970s. And there's a little black bead of caulk, and that was sampled as part of our investigation. And all these samples go off to the lab, and then when results come back, we review them and move on to the next step. Our overall goal of the investigation is to really focus on these higher concentration materials. So our major findings from these couple site investigations were that caulks were the higher concentration materials, followed next by sealants, and then kind of wall and the floor paint at the end. And we target these higher concentration materials because they're likely the highest contributors to indoor air, and likely that material that's resulting in the largest impact to indoor air quality. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so while that building materials investigation has been going on and all these samples are being collected, we also have a quarterly monitoring program that's been ongoing. So this monitoring is focused in areas of the school where indoor air concentrations were either near or above the school action level, and the consultant comes in and they collect samples every quarter. the purpose of the sampling, there's a couple components to it. So one major component is if there is any temporary mitigation that we're performing, we want to make sure that continues to be effective over time, so we want to make sure it continues to be monitored. Additionally, it's quite common that we see some variability in indoor air samples over time, especially as the seasons change. So we want to make sure we're capturing any of those high trends or low trends as they kind of evolve throughout the year. So I do want to emphasize again, it is pretty normal to see some changes in indoor air values. You'll see it on the next slide, but it's quite commonly tied to temperature. So sometimes when we see warmer temperatures, we see a higher degree of airborne PCBs compared to cooler months like fall and winter. So we have done quite a few quarterly monitoring events. The most recent one was in June, so samples were collected the first week in June. Results came back to us at the end of June. I reviewed them, Health reviewed them, and Health came up with a set of occupancy recommendations based on that data. So we did see some increases in some spaces, so we wanted to make sure we incorporate that newest data into our recommendations. So I'm not going to go through like all of the quarterly data. I just picked out kind of the areas where we saw those increases. But if anyone's interested in the full data set, or if you want to look at past quarterly data, it's all available on our database online. Okay. So the first area I want to focus on is the second floor of the B wing. And you'll remember back in the earlier parts of the presentation, I talked about that grouping procedure that we go through. So all of the pink rooms are grouped together, all of the purple rooms are grouped together, likely because they have similar building materials. Same with the gold and the red, and you can see that there are quite a few groups in this whole school, but we'll just focus on the second floor B wing. And then those little black triangles are the classrooms that were actually sampled as part of the quarterly monitoring. And the two rooms that I wanted to call out specifically, so one's room is 205, which is kind of on the bottom of the page, had a value of 300 nanograms per meter cubed, which is right at that IAL value of 300. 214, right across the hallway, in that gold color, was at 310, so just a hair above that IA value. So what this means when we see a concentration that goes over the IAL threshold is Health will incorporate that new data into their occupancy recommendations. And in this case, what's been recommended is to not use any spaces over the IAL and not use any untested spaces that are in a group where an IAL exceedance has also been found. So I mentioned we extrapolate data to those untested rooms. That's how that comes about. So a couple rooms on the second floor B wing have been recommended not to use for the time being. And let's do the next slide. Okay, and then this is the second area I wanted to focus on where we also saw an increase in concentration. So this was in the training room, which was just off of the gym on the bottom of the page, had a concentration of 490 nanograms per meter cubed in June of this year. The other space that was grouped with the training room is A108B, which is over there on the left-hand corner in the bottom. So those were the two spaces in this area that we recommended not use for right now. I will point out that primary spaces, these are classrooms, cafeteria, gym, places where people are spending a lot of time, those are the types of rooms where Health will provide an occupancy recommendation. However, ancillary spaces, so things like hallways, storage closets, entranceways, places where folks aren't spending a large amount of time, we still will sample those just so we understand if there is something there that we need to investigate, but we don't assign an occupancy recommendation to them. So you'll see some other values listed up here with the asterisk. Those are some examples of ancillary spaces that we sampled, but that we don't restrict or recommend restrict any access to. Okay, next slide, please. So this is an example of a room that we sampled over time, and I just wanted to put it up as a visual aid. So you'll see the blue line on the bottom is data from room 205. All the way on the left is April 2024, that's when we did our first sampling event. And then you'll see different points throughout the year where we did more sampling, and then our most recent event all the way on the right-hand side in June of 2025. So you'll see it fluctuates through time. That green line that's also graphed is temperature. So this is temperature in the room when the sample was collected. And you can see that they line up pretty well. So I think our takeaway from this is that temperature does seem to be correlated with indoor air concentrations, and when we see higher temperatures inside, we see higher PCB concentrations, and the corollary also being true. Cooler temperatures in October and January seem to be associated with lower indoor air concentrations. And this is just one room. The trends seem to hold true for the other rooms too, but I just wanted to put a visual up here. And then that, I think it's maroon or dark red line at the 300 value, that's that IAL value. So you can see that we haven't had a value that high in this room yet, but once we did get that data in, we want to make sure that we address it and take steps quickly once we have that information. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so what happens now? So we met with the school in July, and we discussed a couple options that we could move forward with. The school representatives we spoke with preferred taking a very conservative approach, a very health protective approach of just not using these spaces for the time being, either until we have more information and these indoor air values are reduced, or possibly some other guidance coming from health. But for the time being, the recommendation is just to not use these spaces. Meanwhile, we'll continue monitoring indoor air. So as Jonathan mentioned, we have this quarterly monitoring program. We just completed, June was actually the 4th of 4 quarters, so we'll be planning our next set of events in the near future. And we'll also be incorporating everything we've learned in the last year from our previous monitoring, carrying that knowledge through as we plan the next set of events. And last bullet on this slide, what's happening now, vegan cleanup planning. So we'll look for the school district to hire a consultant to prepare the evaluation of corrective action alternatives, which I'll talk about in the next slide. ECA is the acronym, and we'll discuss cleanup alternatives, eventually select a cleanup plan, and then move forward with implementation. All right, next slide. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the building materials sampling we've completed. We have a good understanding of what our source areas are, what the impacted materials are, concentration, location, degree, and extent. We are ready to move on to thinking about how do we actually address these materials. All right, next slide. Okay, so step one is the evaluation of corrective action alternatives, or ECA is the acronym that we've been hearing a lot about. And the ECA is a planning document that provides an analysis of all the different cleanup options that could potentially work or could even be considered to move towards cleanup. A couple considerations that we think about when we're comparing and contrasting these alternatives. I didn't put the full list up here, I just pulled out a couple that I thought were most important, or of primary importance. So one is overall protection of human health and the environment. So are these cleanup strategies going to keep the community safe and keep our staff safe and keep the environment safe? What's the long-term and short-term effectiveness of each different option? How do they compare to each other? Cost, another big one. And this is cost not just of the immediate demolition removal type costs, but if there is some kind of long-term monitoring or long-term monitoring and maintenance costs, we want to make sure we have a good understanding those cumulative costs over 10, 20, 30 years, make sure we get a holistic understanding of what the entire cost could be. Community acceptance, and then feasibility is the last one I have listed. Next slide. So the ECA in Hartford High School. So the ECA hasn't been started yet, but some of the materials that we'll expect to be discussed in the ECA I've listed up here. So one's the original windows, so that caulk around the window frames was one of our source materials, so evaluating different options for dealing with that caulk. Additionally, we do have evidence of some substrate data that Jonathan mentioned that the PCBs in that caulk have actually started to migrate into the neighboring material, so migrate into that brick or into that CMU. So that is definitely a finding we'll want to carry forward into our cleanup planning. Expansion joints, so the caulk found in expansion joints, caulk around door frames, and then wall and floor paint. And although the wall and floor paint did tend to be somewhat lower of a concentration than these really hot caulks, since there is so much painted material, especially you think even in a room like this, there's a lot of painted materials in here. All of that can aggregate and add up together to be a very impactful secondary source to indoor air. Okay, next one. Okay, so the next step, kind of like forward looking for what's going to be happening next, is for the school district to hire a consultant who's going to prepare that ECA of how to address impacted materials. And again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, until we address this impacted caulk and this impacted paint, we're not going to be improving the indoor air quality at all. So it's really critical that we address these materials, and there's a couple different ways that we can do that. So I listed a couple out, and keep in mind that probably for a project of this size, which is on the larger side, we might be using a mixture of these, or layering them to get the full cleanup plan that's going to meet all of our requirements. So just a couple ideas. So the really straightforward one is just removal, so removing the caulk, removing door caulk, removing window caulk. That can be layered in with limited or substantial removal of adjacent material, so removing a small amount of brick, or maybe a large amount of brick, or maybe an entire wall. And there's nuance within that that we can think about and figure out what's going to be the best for each different area of the school. Encapsulation is another strategy. So if there were to be lower level PCBs that are going to be left in place, we'd want to make sure they're encapsulated and that they are prevented from releasing PCBs into indoor air. So there's some special paints that we can use to make sure it kind of stays where it is and doesn't migrate other places. If there is going to be any type of on-site management or any PCB-containing materials left in the school, we'd want to make sure there's a long-term monitoring plan in place and that there's an ongoing maintenance schedule to make sure those remedies continue to be effective for the long term. Okay, next slide. So we've talked about source materials, we've talked about different strategies that can be employed, we've talked about what's in an ECA, but how does the school district put this all together and figure out, well, what's the best plan for us and our community? What kinds of things should we be thinking about? So we'll work closely with you all to help kind of guide that planning and make sure that you're going to pick the best option for your school and for your community. So I thought of some specific planning considerations, but I think this is definitely an area where school board input would be like really great to hear. So the first one I thought of was understanding our overall goals of cleanup. So we've got our regulatory requirements of a certain amount of work that has to happen or a certain criteria that needs to be met. But the district might decide, yes, we're going to do that, and we're going to go above and beyond and do maybe a much more substantive removal of materials. And that's totally fine. I think we'll just want to make sure we're planning for that and that everyone's on the same page of what goal are we trying to get to, or what is our success point that we're trying to meet that's above and beyond the regulatory requirements. Some other considerations to keep in mind, so prioritizing specific impacted materials or specific areas. We can think about phasing work. So I know Jonathan's mentioned maybe starting in the gym as like a phase one and moving forward from there. And phasing work to hopefully maintain as much functional space as we can in the school so you can continue to operate your school. And then the last one I wanted to mention is coordination of PCB work with other planned work at the school. So I know there's some other capital projects that are in their planning phases. I think it would be great and make sense and hopefully have some cost savings too if we can kind of combine some of those at the same time or under a similar scope of work so we could potentially address two problems at the same time. So we'd definitely be looking for ways to do that. So I think once the ECA has been written, we've all had a chance to look at it, I think we'd probably want to come back and maybe do another meeting with the community, and so we can get their input and ask questions and get everybody on board. So I think maybe we'd be looking for a future meeting, maybe in the fall. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but maybe we'll back fall, winter to talk about that. It'd be great. Okay, next slide. All right, so once we have the ECA and we've all reviewed it and taken a look at it, and we have a cleanup plan that we're going to move forward with, the consultant will prepare the corrective action plan, or a CAP. And the CAP is a really detailed document that goes through the methodology of what the plan is, where, cost, kind of all the nitty-gritty details that are going to go in and allow the consultant to kind of actually get this work happening and boots on the ground. So it's ultimately the district's decision what cleanup plan we move forward with. Not having those costs in front of us right now, or a clear direction of kind of those nitty-gritty details, we may, as DEC, may be only able to support part of the cleanup cost if we're not able to support it fully, but that's definitely a conversation we can have in more detail a little bit later on. Does somebody have a question?
Is that the L?
Yep.
How long do you think it's going to take to get from the plan to when we could start? Do you have any idea at all? I mean, are we looking at a year? Are we looking at 6 months?
That's a good question. So there's definitely a couple of components to it. So I really think the critical first step is really to get the consultant hired, because they're the ones who are going to do the bulk of the writing. They're going to pull all the quotes together from contractors and really be orienting that work. So I think it depends kind of on how quickly the school district wants to move. I would say maybe to go from having the ECA prepared to CAP implementation, 8 months to a year, somewhere in there. It really depends on a lot of factors. So like something we're talking about with another school is they're considering replacing some windows, but just to get the windows ordered in, it's a long lead time. So those are the kinds of things we have to factor into our overall timeline. So I don't have a great answer. I know it's not very satisfactory. But something we can think about is, again, phasing work. So maybe if we don't want to tackle the entire school at one time, maybe it makes sense to do some specific area or some specific portion as like a smaller bite.
Thank you.
And I got one more slide and then I'm done. So funding status. So we received $9.5 million to use towards PCB cleanup and planning in this fiscal year, so July 2025 to June 2026. We do have all the grant paperwork in place with the district, so once we have something to approve, we're ready to get rolling. Funding is going to be shared among 6 schools that have the highest priority needs, so Hartford being one of them. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't know if and how much funding for PCBs will be included in future years' state budgets, but that's definitely something we'd share as soon as we know it. So unfortunately, I have information for this year, but not future years. That's all. I got one more question slide.
Cassie, can I just confirm something you meant? So you're kind of answering me here. The test results are there. Are the site investigation reports and such there as well?
I thought I heard somebody calling. So yeah, I have there the PCB database linked. We do have our reports. They're actually on a separate database that we use for all of our site management. So yes, they are publicly available online.
So, because I've been asked that. So the data is a big data set. The site
Yeah.
investigation reports are kind of a little bit distilled.
I think
Those are available as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think they're a little bit more user-friendly because they have some more kind of explanation in them. But yes, so all the indoor air data is available, and all those reports are available. And they have some nice figures in there too that I think are very illustrative. But yeah, really, I would say overall, we're looking to move forward with cleanup planning. As for funding, the directive that we've been given is to support schools that are ready to move forward with planning and implementing cleanup plans for this next fiscal year. So we're here to support you any way that we can, and I know a lot of us talk pretty often, so we're always here to answer questions.
So if I'm looking at the earlier slide correctly, we have 2 rooms that are above the immediate action level, so we're going to lose those 2 classrooms for this school year, as well as potentially the 4 classrooms that are next to them if they've been untested.
Yeah, could we go back to that slide of the B wing?
Right there.
Yes, yeah, so room 205 was sampled. So it's that room. And now we do have, there was a community letter that went out earlier this week or at the end of last week. There's a table in there that has all of this written down and has the use or not rooms for which rooms kind of fall into which category. But basically the recommendation is, so room 205 not to be used, and then any of those other pink rooms up there, so 224, 222, 220, 211, 207, 201, any of those pink rooms, we'd also recommend not using because they are untested and we did not sample in there. So we're presuming the indoor air quality in those rooms is similar to room 205.
So a total of 9 to 10. I'm not sure what 218A
Yes.
is. 12
That,
total?
and then, so then 214 in that gold color, following same pattern there.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm not sure what
206,
our final
12,
count
12.
was.
There's a total of 2 rooms that are now over the were tested that are not used, and then there's 10 total rooms that were grouped with those 2 that were untested and are not used, as well as the training room in group 28 was over the immediate action level, and it has room A108B that was not tested grouped with it. So I think it's a total of maybe 14 rooms now that are not used that were previously used.
Any other questions from the board? Kathy, any questions?
No.
No?
I know it's a lot of information, so if anyone does think of more questions, you all have my contact info. It's on the first slide. So if anyone wants to email or reach out. Also in that community letter, if you have health-specific questions, there's a phone number and also an email address in there. And I think, Danielle, if you call the phone number, you can remain anonymous if you want to.
I think you can. You'll have to leave, it'll get forwarded through to either Andrea or I or our voicemail. Or I think if you reach a voicemail, you'll leave contact information for us to call you back. So entirely up to you which contact method you choose, but we're always happy to answer questions. And we will tell people that you contacted us.
Kevin, you have a question? Did he?
Will the state take into consideration the capital projects that we have lined up with their approval of the corrective action plans?
In what kind of way?
So if we know that a potential area of the building has, say, fire alarm issues, sprinkler issues, or lead water, or a boiler that's failing, do you take that into consideration when we submit a corrective action plan?
I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, yeah, for planning purposes, yes. So I don't think we would pay for new sprinklers or something that's kind of
Right, no,
outside
no.
the realm of PCBs.
But if your thought is encapsulation is the best
Yeah.
plan of action, but we also have, say, code violations, lead in the water, and stuff like that, do you take that into consideration for approval of funds?
Yeah, I think we would look for that information to be in any in the CAP planning, because I think that is really important. If there's a certain area of the school that requires some kind of more demolition than you would otherwise need if there weren't a problem there. Yeah, that's definitely something I think we'd want captured in that plan. Really, as long as it's meeting kind of our base requirements for really just addressing the material, it's really whatever works best for the school. So I think there probably will be some areas where maybe more aggressive removal makes sense, and maybe some other areas where that doesn't make as much sense. And we can, yeah.
Coordinate it, so we can finish our work, but
Yep.
you do what you need to do with sprinklers and then sew the whole thing up so that we're all done.
So we install sprinklers and then we put more Band-Aids on with encapsulation?
We would take care of whatever the problem is that we're dealing with PCB issue.
Right.
Leave this space untouched so that you can do the sprinkler part, if that's what we're talking about, and then get the room all fitted back up to the way
if the PCBs are leached into the concrete block, we're still gonna encapsulate that, and then we're tied on to permanent monitoring after that? Okay.
If that's one of the choices, that's one of the choices, and we would work with the school on how to manage the PCBs in place. So in other places, we left PCBs in place and they had to drill into the substrate or the wall or whatever. So we made sure that the area was maintained, managed, put back to what it needs to be after installation. I think all I'm saying is if there's a similar space where we're working on it and you're trying to do some sort of sprinkler system, we would coordinate the work to happen at the same time so that we could make a space clean for you to do whatever you need to do the work, and then get all done at the same time.
Okay. So with continued monitoring, if we drop below the immediate action level, say, so June, there's not many students in here, there's not much ventilation, depending on when they tested. Do we ever get back the use of those locations? That might be, no. So these 14 rooms are basically off limits until
Everything's done.
you do resample. So do you reopen access to those rooms knowing that they've been over the immediate action level?
Well, we don't normally change occupancy unless additional work has been done in that space, or unless we have some sort of additional information besides just quarterly monitoring.
Right, but you're telling me that temperature and ventilation already play a factor in the testing results of air samples.
Yes.
So we could probably make them pass, which I don't want to do. My goal is to get rid of the issue entirely. But right now, you're telling me that we're going to lose 14 rooms right before the beginning of the school year, which is the bulk of the upstairs.
If additional mitigation is done, which DEC can speak more to,
Yeah.
Which could involve changes to the way that air is handled, we can provide updated occupancy guidance.
Right,
in those spaces.
Winter's coming and all that, but my concern is that we're going to have limited space for roughly the same number of students, and we're running out of Band-Aids. And that's not directed at you, that's directed at this
Situation.
district.
Yeah, so there's a couple different options, because obviously I'd see it's impactful to lose 12 classrooms. I mean, that's such a large number. 14, thank you. Yeah, there's a couple different options that we can think about. I think ultimately, if we enter into the conversation of wanting to reopen those rooms, we want to make sure it's going to be done in a way that's going to be safe for everybody, and that's going to be continued to remain below the IAL, not just in the winter, but also maybe for next summer too. So some of the things, and we could talk about this more offline if it's something the school board wants to talk about more. We've used some temporary mitigation at some other schools when they had classrooms kind of in a similar place as you all do now. And they were pretty effective, and they've remained effective at reducing concentrations below the IAL for an extended period of time. And if that's something we wanted to explore, it would also be coupled with still that quarterly monitoring to make sure if we are doing something, we want to make sure that it keeps working. But ultimately, we're always trying to make decisions that are going to be as health protective as possible. Yeah.
Coach?
Kevin's still got his hand up. Kevin?
Thank you. A lot of that same line of thinking, in order for the board to work with our consultants that we will be hiring, that timeline becomes really, the question, in order to get school, started. Where are we going to put those students? And how do we move forward safely? Are like key questions in all of this. I understand the mitigation piece, we've talked about this, long enough to have a pretty good understanding of that part of the process and testing. I guess the question for us as a board is, what are our next steps that provide for the best, and I don't mean best as much as safest as well as the administration.
Would you like some of us to provide a little bit of information with regard to our planning, since having received this information? Would that be helpful?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a couple of our Hartford High School administrators with us, so I invite them to provide context if I miss anything. And I know that Jonathan might have some more contextual information as well. But the second we received these results and shared them, we have been putting together a plan for where these classes will be held, where staff will be. And I just have to commend the high school administration for the creativity and innovation that they've put forth, and the time and energy in thinking about how to finagle our master schedule, for example, and think through, you know, what does this mean in terms of like where classes will be held, and many of the sacrifices that will need to be made, for example, to preparation time and where that time is spent for our educators. And they've done a phenomenal job of figuring out where these classes will be held, with the priority being keeping our students on campus, and for our students to feel, you know, like they're having the same experience that they ordinarily would. So a great amount of planning has already gone into place to determine where these classes will be held, given that they will need to be relocated, with the priority being, and this came up from someone, the priority being that we're not kind of like going back and forth with our occupancy and disrupting the learning of our students and the instructional, you know, time of our educators by continuing to move and bend and contort for whatever results we may encounter throughout the year. Our approach was to think in a really conservative way about, if we take these classrooms offline now, while we have, albeit weeks, to prepare and think through it, that's a better alternative than us finding out that the air sampling results are not in our favor in October and having to do that then. So we've been erring on a more conservative approach to this, with Nancy's input and help, and Jonathan, and, you know, Roy's here, Ben's here, Nelson, in trying to wrap our heads around what is the least disruptive way to start our year for our students and educators. Would you add anything?
Do you have what you need, is my question.
That's, I guess, the big question for me. The suggestion, you know, might be after we get done with the general discussion, we have the retreat coming up in 2 weeks. We can add to the retreat agenda just an update, you know, on the opening of school progress, you know, as well as the work in coming up with the consulting team that's going to help us with the bigger questions, if that makes sense.
That help?
So can you make do is my question. Do we, I mean, I'm looking at resources like mobile classrooms or, no?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
As things currently sit, we have a plan for the rooms that are closed. If we have to close more rooms, I think we need to have a different conversation.
Okay.
Especially if we don't anticipate reopening any rooms that are currently closed. So if the situation in no way improves, and it can only get worse, so to speak, through quarterly or sampling testing, then I think what we're looking at is we're okay right now, but it doesn't look like we're gonna be
basically you're squeaking by with what you have. And if it gets worse, we're gonna have a tougher conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
There's other hands here.
Did Kevin have his hand up again?
Looks like.
Did he?
Kevin, you still have a question?
No, I think we, we covered where we're at. We'll do a check-in here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Do we have anybody else?
There's a Daryl Herrick.
We can probably save that for the public comments.
I think
Yeah,
so
let's
too.
just keep moving.
Can you just make sure that the people who are talking in the room come up to the mic, because we can't hear for watching at home.
Yeah, so Daryl, I'll
Thank you.
paraphrase for you there. Basically, they can make do with what they have, given the current closures. But if they lose future classrooms down the road, it's gonna be a different story. And we're gonna have to have another conversation to look at other resources, which could include mobile classrooms for the time.
Okay, are you guys gonna do more questions after?
Yeah, there's a public comment section right after we do the policy work.
All right, great, thank you.
Can you hold up the end too, please?
I want an answer from the people from the state, so if they're gonna stick around.
Go ahead and ask.
I might as well take it now, yeah.
I'm Colin Butler. I've got two questions, actually. One is, on the rooms that are going to be abandoned, a number of them are abandoned only because they have similar characteristics to the rooms that were tested, but they were not tested. Couldn't you circle back and do testing on those rooms rather than just unilaterally abandoning them at this point? So that you'd have fewer rooms lost to high levels of PCBs?
I think that's a good question, and I know it's definitely something that's come up with some other schools before. I think my big picture response to that is, I think if we are gonna start talking about just doing like a more widespread sampling event, that we have a good understanding of like why these spaces might be the same or why they might be different. So that grouping was based on that inventory that the consultant did, and they took note of all the similar materials that were in that room. So I think if we wanted to reapproach those groups and maybe go over it again with a fine-tooth comb, since we have done building materials sampling now, I think we'd be open to that proposal. But it would be really important to have enough justification to tell you that, yeah, these two spaces are really different, and it's because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and this is why we feel confident about it. So I think definitely something we're open to talking about more and thinking about more, just looking for evidence really to support that.
Just for clarification, you identified a whole bunch of rooms and colored them pink because they had similar characteristics. Something caused you to consider them as a group. Some of those rooms were tested and results were satisfactory. They'll continue to be used. Others failed.
Yep.
And the fact that they failed is now triggering you to abandon all the rooms that weren't tested. So I guess I'd suggest that maybe there is something that you missed in identifying the characteristics of that set of rooms that allows some of them to pass and some of them to fail. And it probably would be worth going back to retest or test the rooms that were not tested to ensure that we really, really have to abandon them.
Can we actually go back to that slide, Jacob? Because I think you bring up a good point that we are seeing these disparities, right? Kind of even from one end of the hallway into the other. So I think you're right, there probably is something that's different, but we don't know what it is. And I think until we kind of have some backup information, and I would definitely invite when you have your consultant on board and they're coming up with the next set of quarterly monitoring plans, I would strongly encourage them to go back over all the data that we have, think about it again, and if you want to propose something different, I think that's great. I think that would definitely be something that would be great for us to talk about. Yeah, so you can see from 2 rooms, 228 and then
213.
213 is the other one. So they're they are a little bit lower. Yeah, they're definitely below that 300 value, still generally within the same range of concentrations, but yeah, very possible that we've learned something more or that there is something different about those spaces such that they might have different indoor air values. So I think definitely something to explore more, and we're definitely open to talking more about that. But for right now, this is the information that we have.
I've also got another question, which in my mind is the larger question, and that is the effect of PCBs cumulative over a period of time or a long period of time?
I'm going to look to
Is it-
Dr. Kirk pleadingly for, yeah.
Does it affect children more than it affects adults? Two-part question. Is there an answer for that?
I've got another one if we need another one.
Hi. Yes, children are more sensitive to developmental effects and neurological effects. As you accumulate PCBs over the course of your lifetime at a rate that's faster than the rate that it can be excreted, then yes, risk continues to grow, which is why you want to reduce it, preferably early in a person's life. Does that help?
So let's say the average student spends 4 years here, they're exposed a little bit. What about our staff that's been in, let's say, flirting around the school action level or just below the school action level? Is it accumulative over time?
The dose continues to increase over time with what's in your body.
Sorry.
The amount of PCBs that are retained in your body will increase as you age, yes. But as most adults, your brain is developed, pretty much your neurological system is developed, you probably would not see effects of that nature, but you might see some increase in risk of other effects.
Like the cancer?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're potentially, well, more than likely putting our staff and
Right.
faculty at risk.
I'm sorry, what's that?
So we're more than likely putting our staff and faculty at risk by
Well, no, only if you continue to expose them to excessively high levels of PCBs, and if you can keep them at that, 100 or below the 300, then that would be protective.
So they can, so let's say that if we were at 90 nanograms in a classroom, and a teacher spends 20 years in that classroom, you're saying that at that level, they're not at that risk?
Right, they would have still a very low risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colin, do you have, go ahead, now's the time while they're here.
Okay, Jeremy, you followed up with exactly where I was going with my questioning. I'm very concerned about the effect that the PCBs are having on our kids in these schools, but they're in and out over a short number of years. We've got staff that have been in these rooms, in this building, for decades, and I guess I want to just express my concern that we're paying attention to the effects on them. And the question is there any testing available currently that we can ask our staff to take advantage of that might indicate that there is some accumulation of PCBs to the level that it would be a problem?
So we don't recommend that people get blood tests for PCBs. PCBs are in, unfortunately, they're in our diets, they're in other parts of our environment. So a blood test can tell you if you have PCBs in your blood, but can't necessarily tell you, where they came from or if they'll cause health effects. We do, however, recommend that staff go to their primary care providers and they can include PCB exposure in their medical record, and then, the health effects that PCBs can cause. Some of them can be screened for, like some of the cancers, so their primary care providers can work with them to come up with a plan to possibly screen for those things, or, just knowing that it's in their medical record. And same goes for kids. Their parents can talk to their primary care providers as well. Does that help answer that?
Would that be a pre-existing condition? So I would say
Good
just go to your annual physical and get your annual blood work done.
Yeah, and you can just include a note that you had PCBs in your school, and if your primary care provider has questions, they can reach out to the health department, and we can provide them with some more information.
May I, just for a moment? I think that you're getting at a point that is important, I think, for our public to hear, as well as like the ubiquitous nature of PCBs. And I don't know if there's like some helpful data to support, you know, what that looks like in terms of people's exposure. Just because I think as like something that we're all concerned about in terms of exposure, it's helpful to better understand where they exist. I'm hearing like caulk, I'm hearing, you know, all of these materials that were used prior to 1979. And so I assume that it's safe to assume that if your home was built before that time, or, you know, certain other environments that you frequent were born, you know, were crafted before that time, that those are also places where you could potentially have exposure. But I think that in general, we talk a lot about PCBs as being an issue in schools, which is true. I think also for our own edification, it's helpful to better understand like what this exposure is looking like for all of us, you know, when we're talking to our PCPs.
I'm only going to cover the portion of residential homes where there has been some studies done on that, and it's not really being seen in residential homes, mostly large commercial construction is where it has been seen, so large apartment complexes and stuff like that, so not your normal Vermont house. It's not a place that we're seeing it. I can let Andrea talk about other areas where people are exposed to PCBs in their diet.
Sure. Yeah. So people are exposed through their diets, and so if you're getting some exposure through the air you breathe, there may be ways that you can reduce exposures in other areas of your life through diet. So things that are red meat tends to be higher, whole fat, dairy products, which I know nobody wants to hear that, but you could cut back on that stuff. And there's evidence that eating a diet high in fiber will prevent some of these PCBs from being absorbed. So you can up your fiber count, and this will have other beneficial effects for your health as well. The other thing is that potentially PCBs in soil, and wash your hands. If you've been working in the garden, wash your hands before you eat. Make sure that children wash their hands frequently as well, and that'll help reduce your intake.
I do want to add that, you know, we talk about PCBs and other facets of our life, but when indoor air levels in schools are high, it is the biggest source of exposure for students and staff. So it is good that we're reducing exposures for them and taking steps to, you know, clean up the school.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Back to Colin, Mr. Butler's question about the number of rooms and assumptions made based on similar characteristics of the room. What's interesting, and this is an important question that he asked, is since the building was built, there have been a number of renovations and remodels that have occurred, you know, over time. And being that certain products, you know, like the caulk, as an example, is a very, let's say, ubiquitous factor. If during the course of renovation, those components were changed in some of those rooms, wouldn't it make sense to do a complete set of tests to ensure that buildings that might have been renovated might have those lower test scores.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up. So the renovation history of a building, especially one like this that was built in that time period before PCBs were banned in the 1960s, that renovation history is definitely very critical for understanding the site as a whole. So I know we're aware of some renovation history at this school. The wood shop comes to mind. I remember Nelson mentioning that when we did our first site walkthrough. So I know record keeping of that renovation history might be kind of sparse. I think Jonathan spent some time looking for whatever documents we might have. Anything related to that would definitely be very helpful to bring to light. Like I said, we're aware of a couple spots that were renovated. I think the library was one of them. The consultant actually put together a really nice figure in their most recent site investigation report that lays out basically everything we know about construction renovation history. But if there's more documentation and material that anyone knows of, like that would be super helpful. So I don't know if that exists.
Just a suggestion, having, been just from a historical perspective, the science labs have been on that list at one point. And I think that, this is back to Jonathan, his predecessor has on historical let's say, memory or institutional history. And I'm not sure if we went back to that individual about those pieces. And we also had a lot of consultative work that was done over, I'd say, almost 25 years. This the same consulting firms, so just so we have a clear picture, back to Colin's point, about those rooms especially. If that makes sense to folks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I think I just want to represent some of the questions that we collected.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So one of the questions that did come to us came from staff who will be relocated out of those spaces and what they can expect in terms of like gathering materials, like how safe is it for people to be accessing those spaces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll let maybe Dr. Kirk answer that question.
Yeah, sure. If you're going into a classroom for a few minutes to collect some things or put something away, that should be fine. It's a short duration.
Okay.
Any more?
Would any of the materials they collect have a high contamination level? Say if they've been in if it's personal belongings and that's been that person's classroom for 15 years or 10 years, whatever, would those materials in that classroom have high levels of PCBs potentially absorbed out through the air?
PCBs will absorb to anything with carbon in them. So, there may be a short period of time where something might off-gas if it became absorbed into it. I think if they're taking anything out where it's hard surfaces, they can wipe it down and bring it into the room. I don't really see that anything in the room would be a large source of exposure.
Thank you.
And I think the last question that I gathered was from a community member, and we've talked about this, thinking through, and you referred to this a little bit, Cassie, how the state is prioritizing, knowing that there are 6 districts that are being prioritized, how the state is determining what the distribution amount is out of that 9.5 million that the legislature set aside for this purpose.
Yep, no, that's a good question. So the directive we've been given from far above our pay grade, to be frank, is to support schools that are moving through our process and are ready to move forward with the ECA, and they're ready to prepare and implement the CAP and really get implementation started. So I think I mentioned that we have this funding available for fiscal year, so it'll end June of 2026. So we're looking to really complete as much work and spend as much money we can out of that funding that's available while we have it. So I think we'll be supporting schools as fast as we can get things in and we can get them out the door, we'll be looking to do.
Thank you.
Daryl, you're on. You have a question?
Sure, I have a couple questions. Are we only doing the high school and the vocational center, or are we doing all of our schools in our district? Like the other schools that we have in town?
Yeah, so there were 3 schools in this district that were built before 1980. So the middle school was one, and that was actually the first school we sampled. Did not find any school actionable exceedances there. And then White River Elementary was done early in 2025, I believe. Also did not find any school actionable exceedances there. It was really just the high school and tech center where we had some findings that brought us on to the next step.
Okay. Second question is, on that plot that you show the time versus the levels and temperature?
Yep.
Is it possible for you to convert that to a temperature and level plot where you could actually predict? So you only care about the high levels. So if you were able to put that on just on an XY plot with the temperature and the levels for a specific room, you would be able to predict based on the temperature what that level is going to be, correct?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I want to be careful about predicting future values, just because temperature is definitely a big impactful factor, but there could be other things going on too that might also impact our indoor air quality. So I think it could give us probably a good general understanding. You know, we know warmer temperature, higher concentrations, lower temperature, lower. But I would definitely always go back to the discrete sampling data that we collect each quarter as really our primary knowledge source.
Right, and are the rooms at the high school, are those connected with air quality handling in each room? Are they connected like as a series?
That I don't know.
Like I was thinking, could you shut off specific rooms that were rated higher, just block off the airflow to those particular rooms so that you would have more available type of thing?
Yeah, that's a question, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to. I'm not sure if anyone in this room
I
does.
can't remember, I was there 35 years ago, so I don't remember if the rooms even had the ceiling ventilation pressure.
You probably.
It hasn't changed, I can probably tell you that.
Yeah, I know, but I don't even remember, that's how long it's been. That's pretty sad, really. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Daryl. Is there anyone else online? Do we have anything else? No? We appreciate your coming. Thank you very, very much. I think it was very helpful. You had a lot of good questions coming up. So we appreciate it. We look forward to working with you even more.
Thank you.
May I just
Yes, you may.
add
Yeah.
too that, just for the public knowledge, that we are planning to collaborate with this team again once everyone is kind of like back online, you know, checking their email and coming back to school. We do plan to host another forum and invite everyone here and give, you know, faculty, staff, parents, caregivers, community members an opportunity to meet with everybody and ask any related questions that they have. So that will most likely happen outside of a board meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that there will be more opportunities to speak with our experts here.
It'd be more like a community forum versus a board meeting, yes. Okay,
All right.
thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks for your time. We'll depart, but if anyone has more questions in the meantime, feel free to share my contact info.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Policy work. Jeremy.
So this will be the first reading of the transgender and gender nonconforming students policy. So this will be coded as C28 to line up with the VSBA's policies, and so that we can keep on top of managing these in the future. So transgender and gender nonconforming students, the policy. This policy is designed to provide direction for administrators, staff, students, and parents to address issues that may arise concerning the needs of transgender and gender nonconforming students. Vermont's Public Accommodations Act 9 VSA Section 4502 protects all students from discrimination, including transgender students and students who do not conform to traditional gender stereotypes. It is the policy of the Hartford School District to provide a safe, orderly, civil, and positive learning environment for all students, regardless of actual or perceived gender identity or gender expression. Under Vermont law, individuals are protected on the basis of their gender identity. Definitions. Gender identity means a person's actual or perceived gender identity or gender-related characteristics that are intrinsically related to a person's gender or gender identity, regardless of the person's assigned sex at birth. Gender expression means the way a person externally communicates gender to other people, such as through behaviors, clothing, hairstyles, voice, mannerisms, activities, or body characteristics. Gender nonconforming refers to a person whose gender-related identity and/or gender expression does not conform to the social expectations or norms of a person of that sex assigned at birth. Other terms that have the same similar meaning include gender creative, gender variant, gender expansive, gender fluid, or gender atypical. Transgender is a term that describes a person whose gender identity or gender expression is different from the person's assigned sex at birth. Cisgender means a person whose gender identity corresponds to their assigned sex at birth. Sexual orientation is a person's emotional or sexual attraction to other people based on the gender of the other person. Sexual orientation is not the same as gender identity. Not all transgender students identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and not all gay, lesbian, and bisexual students display gender nonconforming characteristics. Privacy. All students have the right to privacy, consistent with those rights provided under the Family and Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, FERPA. A transgender or gender nonconforming student will be able to discuss and express their gender identity and gender expression openly, and to decide when, with whom, and how much of their private information to share with others. In addition, school staff will respect any requests to use name and pronoun that corresponds to the student's gender identity that the student asserts or wishes to assert at school. Students will not be required to obtain a court-ordered name and/or gender change, or to change their pupils' personnel records as a prerequisite to being addressed by the name and pronoun that corresponds to their gender identity. There may be times when disclosure to school staff or employees of a student's transgender status is necessary in order to fulfill the school's obligations to the transgender student with respect to safety and health, education, and non-discrimination efforts. In all cases, the school will work closely with students and families in devising an appropriate plan regarding the confidentiality of a student's transgender status that works for both the student and the student's family while meeting competing legal requirements. To the extent possible and consistent with all competing legal requirements, school personnel will endeavor throughout to maintain the confidentiality of the student's transgender status. Student records. The superintendent will adopt procedures that ensure that all students' personally identifiable information is maintained in compliance with FERPA and state and federally mandated reporting requirements. To the extent that the school is not legally required to use a student's legal name or gender on school records and other documents, the school will use the name and gender preferred by the student. Where a student's records, such as standardized tests, report cards, and transcripts, may not be changed absent court order due to state and federal law, efforts will be taken to maintain those records in strictest confidentiality in order to preserve the student's transgender status and where appropriate, such as in the case of health records. For an amended version to be maintained, which preserves the confidentiality of the transgender status where the review of the record is required for educational purposes by either school personnel, the student, or personnel who will be evaluating the student for eligibility purposes, for example. A student or parent in the case of a minor student who is currently enrolled may request retroactive changes to the student's records, including name and gender. Such requests will be handled on a case-by-case basis with consideration of the need to maintain legally accurate records consistent with state and federal mandated reporting requirements, with the school's ongoing efforts to maintain internal student confidentiality regarding a student's transgender status. Former student permanent pupil records will be changed by request of a parent of a minor student or former students who have reached the age of majority, upon receipt of documentation that such legal name and/or gender have been changed pursuant to applicable state law. Use of facilities. A transgender student will not be required to use facilities which conflict with the student's gender. Identity. I'll read that last part again. A transgender student will not be required to use facilities which conflict with the student's gender identity. Any student who expresses a need or desire for increased privacy will be provided with reasonable alternative arrangements. Reasonable alternative arrangements may include the use of a private area or a separate changing schedule, or a use of a single stall restroom. Any alternative arrangement will be provided in a way that protects a student's ability to keep their transgender status confidential. School activities. Students will be permitted to participate in accordance with their gender identity. Privacy accommodations. Accommodations to address student privacy concerns will be addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Because we're truly trying to get all of our policies up to date, and especially since we've been given some that are new. So we're going to be trying, this was a very long one, so we just had one for tonight. We're going to try to do a minimum of 2, a maximum of 3 every school board meeting.
They will get longer because we'll have to read each one 3 times.
Yes.
So
Well, that's true, yeah. But that's statute and we can't help it, so.
we'll take turns reading it.
Well, yeah, you. And Jeremy's been working very hard to get all these up to date for us, and we really appreciate it. Jacob, amendment, capitalization of assets procedure.
Okay, so, this is a procedure that the board has approved because the state has said it needed to be board approved. But for the capitalization of assets, best practice has been updated per guidance from a group of business managers in conjunction with the state. So what I'd like to propose is an amendment, and that's changing the individual component value and 1 year of useful life from $5,000 to $10,000.
I move to amend the capitalization of assets procedure to increase the individual component value in 1 year of useful life from 5,000 to 10,000.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And the motion carries. Thank you very much. It is now time for public comment. The board welcomes public comments in order to accommodate as many community members' voices as possible. Anyone making a comment will be given 2 minutes to speak. This is not a time for discussion, but the board is interested in hearing their comments, concerns, and any suggestions from the public. So I open the floor to public comments. And you'll keep me posted if there's anybody pull up from there.
And I can bring a mic around to anyone if they don't want to walk up to the podium.
No one?
Currently, no hands raised.
Pardon me?
Currently, no hands raised.
And no hands raised? Okay. And let me pull up
I thought
this.
you were going to get away with it.
Pardon? Oh,
We got one.
we got one. Here we go.
I was just waiting for you to poll the atmosphere. I just want to take a moment and thank the board and the administrators, Jonathan, and the folks from the state for continuing to be as transparent as you possibly can be on this PCB issue. I want to go back to one thing that Jeremy said earlier about the encapsulation. And I think what I was hearing was he's about as enthusiastic about encapsulating the problem as I am. So in spite of me arguing that you should probably keep some rooms open that might otherwise be closed, I'm not really enthusiastic about painting over or whatever encapsulation means so much as removing the PCB threat from the building. So I hope that's where we're headed as a board, and I would encourage you to move as quickly as possible, because $9.5 million is going to go to about half of one school district before it's totally consumed. So you really need to keep on this and keep moving full speed ahead. Thank you for being so transparent so far.
Thanks, Colin.
We are trying our best. Thank you. Any more public comment? Okay. I move to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing the evaluation of the superintendent of the provisions of Title I, Section 313A3 of the Vermont statutes, evaluation of a public officer and employee.
Second.
So moved or seconded.
Thank you very much.
We need to vote to bring in.
Yes, yes. Katie is, we were inviting Jacob to come in. We've got, because he does all of our technical stuff, and we've got VSBA Debbie Singinger, who is going to be helping us monitor the whole process. And then we're going to call Katie in afterwards, okay? Okay. Shall we do it?
Yes.
Thank you all very much for coming, and you can stay. Hopefully we're
that, Coach?
Yes.
Okay. The board exited executive session at 8:35. The following action was taken. The board took a straw poll and have decided to make the following motion. I move to award the superintendent a merit award based on the results of the superintendent evaluation, which was compiled from survey results taken from the board, the administration, and Katie herself, that was conducted by the VSBA.
Second.
Thank you.
All those,
Pardon me?
you guys, still got to vote.
Yes, I know. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Katie, for all the hard work you've done. We do appreciate it. Consent agenda. Any appointments, resignations, retirements?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. But soon, right?
Soon.
Oh, good, good. Okay, and meeting minutes.
I believe there's one correction to the minutes. It listed the minutes approved as 5:13, and that should have been 5:21.
Okay, is that it? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the next board meeting will be on it's going to be our retreat. Are we still going to have it on the 13th? Still the 13th. It will be warned just as if the board meeting was there. You are, as a public, you are welcome to come, but there will not be, this will be a training type thing, and so there's not going to be like a meeting, but we do have to warn it, and you are welcome to come if you want. Meeting evaluation.
Meeting date of July 30th, 2025. The board was prepared for the meeting, satisfactory. Board's time was spent on ends, not means, satisfactory. Each board member was given opportunity to participate, satisfactory. Board treated all persons with courtesy and fairness, satisfactory. Board adhered to Robert's Rules of Order, satisfactory. Board adhered to its adopted governance style. It emphasized outward vision. It encouraged diversity in viewpoints. It exercised strategic leadership, not administrative detail. It maintained distinction between board and staff roles. It used collective decision-making. It looked to the future.
And do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? No, we don't need a second one on that one. It is non-debatable. Okay. Thank you all very much. Thanks for hanging in there with us. You who back there is smiling on his face.
Like it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.